Hey there. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today, we're going to be kind of tuning into this conversation that's been kind of echoing around the music world. Like, what does authenticity even mean anymore? Especially when tech is changing how music is made and how we even experience it, you know?
Yeah, it's a question with a lot of layers to it, isn't it?
For sure.
And we're going to be kind of peeling those back, right? By looking at how different artists are approaching their music, their performances, their connection with the fans in this whole digital world that we live in now.
Exactly. And to do that, we've got a really diverse mix of sources. We've got interviews with artists, different generations, different genres, and we're even going to check out the announcement for a new music festival that's trying to do things a little differently.
I'm really interested to see how all these pieces fit together. I mean, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all answer here.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this so interesting. So should we start with the artist who seems to have the most,
Hmm.
let's say, traditional view of authenticity?
Yeah, let's do it. We're talking about Iron Maiden's Bruce Dickinson.
Right, you got it. This guy does not hold back when it comes to expressing his views on how technology is impacting live music. He's made it crystal clear that Iron Maiden will never use backing tracks in their concerts. He actually said they'd bow out with dignity before going down that path. What do you make of that stance?
Wow, it's a strong statement, that's for sure.
It is.
And to understand it, I think we need to look at the context of Iron Maiden's whole career, right? They've been around for decades, built a reputation on these massive high energy live shows.
Right.
And for them, it seems like the authenticity lies in that raw, unfiltered connection with the audience, right? Every note, every drum beat comes from them right there on stage.
Yeah, it's almost like a statement of principle for them, you know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because this isn't a new thing for Dickinson. He's been pretty vocal about this for years.
Right.
Back in 2019, guitarist Adrian Smith gave an interview where he basically echoed those same sentiments, you know?
Yeah.
He even called out other bands for relying too heavily on pre-recorded tracks,
Yeah.
saying it takes away from the real live experience.
Absolutely. And you know what? That dedication to a pure live performance seems to resonate with their fans. People go to those shows expecting that raw energy, that authenticity. In a way, they've become almost a symbol of resistance against what some people see as an over-reliance on tech in music today.
It definitely makes you think. What does it mean for a band to sell out in this day and age? Is it about the music itself, or is it about the way it's presented?
Right, because for a lot of fans, there's a real value in knowing that what you're hearing is 100% the band, giving it their all. And that seems to be especially important for a band like Iron Maiden, whose music is so technically demanding and physically challenging to perform.
Totally. And that brings up another point. They may not be spring chickens anymore,
Yeah.
but they still play their songs in the original keys and tempos. Think about the stamina that takes.
Yeah.
But now let's shift gears a bit and talk about an artist who's taking a totally different approach to connecting with fans.
You're talking about Lorraine Lewis, right? Her decision to join OnlyFans definitely raised some eyebrows.
It did.
Yeah.
Here you have someone who fronted VIXEN back in the day, now leading FEMME FATALE,
Right.
and still very much active in the music scene, even collaborating with Lou Gramm from Foreigner.
Wow.
So it's not like she's faded into obscurity and is grasping at straws or something. What do you think is going on here?
Well, to be fair to Lorraine, she's been very upfront about her reasons for joining OnlyFans. She sees it as a way to connect with fans on a more intimate level, to control her own narrative, and basically embrace a new phase in her career. It's a bold move, that's for sure.
It is. And it definitely challenges our assumptions about what it means for an artist to be authentic, you know. Some people might see it as selling out, right?
Yeah.
But others might see it as a savvy business move or even a form of empowerment.
What do you think?
What do you think out there listening? Let us know in the comments.
I think it's important to remember that authenticity is a really subjective experience, and there's no single right answer. What might feel genuine to one person might feel completely inauthentic to someone else. And that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And just because an artist uses a certain platform or a certain technology, it doesn't necessarily mean they're compromising their artistic integrity. Maybe it's more about intention, you know?
Yeah, what's the motivation behind the decision? Are you doing it for shock value or because you genuinely want to explore new ways to connect with your audience? It seems like Lorraine Lewis falls into that second category.
For sure. And, it's interesting to contrast her approach with Iron Maiden's. It's like two sides of the same coin. You've got this purist view of authenticity on one hand, and then this more entrepreneurial, tech-embracing view on the other.
Yeah.
And both can be valid depending on your perspective. But now let's dive into the creative process itself with another artist.
You're talking about Orianthi, that incredible guitarist who's played with everyone from Michael Jackson to Carlos Santana.
Yes. She's working on a new album called Some Kind of Feeling, and from what she said about her recording process, it seems like she's trying to strike a balance between collaboration and this kind of hands-on creativity.
What's fascinating to me is her emphasis on capturing a live feel, even in a studio setting.
Yeah.
She's working with her band, with producers like Kevin Shirley, but she said that she prioritizes that sense of raw energy and spontaneity. It makes you think, can you really replicate the energy of a live performance, even with all the tools and technology available in a studio?
Right. It's almost like she's trying to bridge that gap between the studio and the stage, which I think a lot of artists are grappling with these days. But how do you do that in a way that feels authentic? What do you think? And what about you listening? Let us know.
Well, I think part of it comes down to the recording techniques that you use. For example, instead of recording each instrument separately, you could have the whole band play together in the same room, capturing that live interaction.
Right.
That kind of thing.
That makes sense. But let's not forget about the role of the producer in all of this.
Right.
Someone like Kevin Shirley, who's known for his work with rock bands, probably has a lot of experience in capturing that raw energy on tape.
Oh, absolutely. A good producer can help guide the process, right? Make sure the performances are captured in a way that sounds natural and dynamic, but without over-polishing or over-producing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a fine line to walk, right? You want to capture the energy of a live performance, but you also want the recording to sound good on its own terms. But now let's talk about something completely different. A new music festival that's trying to shake things up a bit.
You're talking about Rockin in Paradise, the one curated by STYX.
That's the one. And it's got this really interesting concept. Instead of being another massive, overcrowded festival, they're aiming for a more intimate, fan-focused experience.
I read about that. It's all happening on a beach with a smaller venue, on-demand food and drink delivery. They're even doing a Q&A session with STYX hosted by Eddie Trunk.
I know, right?
It's pretty cool.
It sounds pretty amazing. And the lineup is packed with classic rock, heavy hitters, Loverboy, Cheap Trick, 38th Special, Collective Soul. It seems like they're really trying to create a specific kind of vibe,
Yeah, it does seem like they're targeting a particular audience, maybe fans who are a bit tired of the mega festival scene and are looking for something a little more laid back and community driven.
I think you're right. The company behind it, Topeka, is calling them worry-free music vacations. It's less about the chaos of a giant festival and more about creating a curated experience.
And that curated aspect is interesting. It makes you wonder how much curation is too much. At what point does it stop being a festival and become more like a theme park for music fans?
That's a great question. And it kind of brings us back to this idea of authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting a more authentic experience at a giant festival where things are a little more unpredictable, or at a smaller, more curated event where everything is designed to be a certain way?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. Maybe it depends on what you're looking for as a fan. Some people thrive on the spontaneity and the energy of a huge crowd, while others prefer a more controlled environment.
Exactly. It's all about personal preference.
Yeah.
But speaking of fan preferences, I think it's worth noting that Iron Maiden, even with their no-frills approach, have managed to adapt to changing expectations in some ways.
Oh, absolutely. They've embraced social media to connect with fans, and their website it's a treasure trove of content.
Yeah.
But they've done it in a way that feels really consistent with their brand.
Right. It's not like they're suddenly doing TikToks or anything.
Yeah.
But they're finding ways to stay relevant and engage with younger audiences without compromising their core values.
Yeah.
And
that's a tricky balance to strike, especially for a band that's been around as long as they have.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how other veteran bands are approaching this challenge.
It does. It's almost like they have to find ways to evolve without alienating their longtime fans, And it's not just about social media. It's also about things like set lists, merchandise, and even how they interact with the audience during shows.
That brings us back to Lorraine Lewis and her use of OnlyFans. It's another example of an artist pushing boundaries and finding new ways to connect with fans, even if it might be considered, controversial by some.
It's definitely a bold move. And it makes you wonder, is that the future of fan engagement? Are we going to see more artists using platforms like OnlyFans to offer exclusive content and build deeper connections with their audience?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly a trend worth watching, especially as technology continues to blur the lines between the personal and the professional, the public and the private.
And as those lines get blurrier,
Yeah.
it becomes even more challenging to define what authenticity really means.
I think that's a key takeaway from all of this.
Yeah.
Authenticity it's not a fixed point.
Right.
It's something that's constantly evolving as the world around us changes.
Well said. But before we get too philosophical, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of music festivals becoming like theme parks.
Oh, right. I was thinking about how festivals are becoming increasingly focused on creating a specific experience with elaborate stage designs, immersive art installations, and even curated food and drink options.
Right, and some festivals are even going beyond music, incorporating things like comedy, yoga, and workshops into the mix.
Exactly. It's becoming less about just seeing a bunch of bands and more about creating a multi-sensory, immersive experience.
Which is cool,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes you wonder, are we losing something in the process? Is there a risk that festivals are becoming too manufactured, too focused on creating the perfect Instagrammable moment?
That's a valid concern, and it ties into something we talked about earlier with Orianthi and her recording process, the challenge of balancing technology and artistry.
You're right. How do you use technology to enhance the experience without letting it overshadow the music itself? It's a question that applies to both festivals and recording studios.
And it's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, but it's something that every artist, every festival organizer, every music lover needs to think about as we move forward.
I agree. Because ultimately, the future of music depends on finding that sweet spot between innovation and tradition, between technology and human connection.
Yeah, and that balance is something we as listeners and music fans, we need to be aware of too, right? Because our choices, what we listen to, what concerts we go to, what platforms we support, all of that sends a message to the music industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's like this feedback loop.
Exactly.
Artists are influenced by what fans want, and fans are influenced by what artists are putting out there. It's constantly evolving.
It really is.
And that brings me back to something we touched on earlier, AI-generated music. Do you think that kind of throws a wrench into this whole conversation about authenticity?
I think it adds another layer of complexity for sure. Because
Right.
if you can just create music using algorithms and artificial intelligence, does that devalue the human element of creating music?
It's a tough question. On one hand, AI-generated music can be technically impressive, but can it ever really capture the emotion, the nuance, the soul of music made by a human being? What do you think? What do you think out there listening? Hit us up in the comments.
I think there's something special about human creativity that can't be easily replicated by machines.
All right.
There's a vulnerability and imperfection that gives music its depth and resonance.
And a story, right? A human story behind the music,
Yeah.
a lived experience. Maybe AI can create something that sounds like music, but can it create something that truly moves us, that connects us to something bigger than ourselves?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think the answer might lie in how we as listeners choose to engage with AI-generated music. Do we embrace it as a new form of expression? Or do we see it as a threat to the value of human creativity?
It's almost like we're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
And the path we choose is going to shape the future of music in really profound ways. But for now, I think it's important to focus on what we know and love about music and to appreciate the artists who are creating it in a way that feels authentic to them,
I completely agree. Whether it's a band like Iron Maiden, sticking to their guns and delivering those powerful live shows, or an artist like Lorraine Lewis exploring new ways to connect with fans, or someone like Orianthi finding that balance between collaboration and personal expression in the studio. I mean, there's so much amazing music being made right now.
It's true. And there's room for all of it, As long as artists are creating from a place of honesty and passion, and as long as we as listeners are open to new experiences and new ways of connecting with music, I think the future of music is bright.
I think you're right. And at the end of the day, it's not about the technology or the platforms or even the definition of authenticity. It's about the power of music to move us, to inspire us, to connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the ever-changing world of music. Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious.
Yeah, and it's really about finding ways to use these new tools and technologies in a way that serves the music, right? Not letting them become a crutch or a gimmick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's funny, all of this talk about authenticity and technology, It makes me think about the whole vinyl resurgence. What do you make of that?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, here we have this analog format that was supposed to be dead and buried, and it's suddenly cool again.
It is. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. For one, there's the nostalgia factor, right?
Right.
People my age, we grew up listening to vinyl, and it brings back these warm memories.
Yeah.
But it's more than just nostalgia. There's also this sense that vinyl offers a more tangible, authentic listening experience.
It's like you can hold the music in your hands, you know, you're not just streaming it through some invisible algorithm.
Right, right. You have to physically put the needle on the record. You have to flip it over. It's a more active, engaged way of listening.
It's almost like a ritual, you know?
It is. It is. And I think in this age of digital overload, they're craving that kind of slow, deliberate experience.
Yeah, yeah. Makes you think about how much our relationship with music has changed, you know? I mean, back in the day, you had to go to a record store. You had to sift through bins of vinyl. You had to make a conscious effort to find the music you wanted.
And now you've got millions of songs at your fingertips. It's overwhelming.
It is. It is. But you know what? I still think there's something to be said for that old school way of discovering music. The serendipity of stumbling upon a hidden gem, you know? The excitement of bringing home a new record and listening to it for the first time.
Yeah, there's a magic to that's hard to replicate with digital music.
Yeah. And maybe, just maybe, that's part of what's driving this vinyl revival, this desire for a more tangible, meaningful connection with music.
Maybe so. And maybe it's a reminder that authenticity isn't just about the way music is created or produced, but also about how we choose to experience it.
So true. So true. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation.
It has. Thanks for joining us, and keep those ears open and those minds curious.